resilience. I'm your host, Thomas Scaria, a resilience coach, an ultramarathoner, and a relentless believer in the human spirit's ability to rise. This podcast is a companion to my book, Resilience Plus Rise 26.2 Transformative Miles to Unleash Your Marathon of Life Mindset. Each episode is a raw, unfiltered dive into the stories of those who have faced life's hardest battles and emerged stronger. Today, I'm super excited about the guest I have on my show, Mandy Cansler. She's a healthcare consultant. She's a fractional administrator. She has been a clinical officer. But more than that, she's also an amazing thought leader. She has over 20 years of clinical and leadership experience in ophthalmology, and she helps organizations transform through practical strategies, operational excellence, and leadership development. Having such a strong administrative background, she moved away from that periphery and got more into as a consultant and providing customized solution in leadership. And she believes transformation begins from inside out. But what has really got my attention is the book that she's writing, I Am Not Enough Until I. But before I can continue with it, Mandy, welcome to Resilience Plus Rise.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So you had a long, profound career behind in the healthcare industry, and but you decided to pivot and move into something more different. You were in a service player base, but now it's a service wherein your growth is more far-reaching in its own way. What's the reason why you pivoted from where you were and where you are now?
That's a great question, Thomas. So as you shared, ophthalmology, it's a hard word to say. It is. So especially if you're not used to saying it all the time. But yes, I did. I worked for 25 years in ophthalmology, still do. And the last probably 12 years of that in leadership. And I had, the timing of how this happened for me to transition away is interesting because it wasn't something that I really had timed out. It just ended up working out. I knew that as I had led for years, and the more that I led and the more successful that I became, it came with some sacrifices along the way. And some of those sacrifices were mentally in my own life, away from my family, away from kind of who I was as a person. And I'm so fortunate for all of the experiences that I had as an administrator. It gave me the knowledge and the opportunity, I should say, to be able to fail and learn and succeed and overcome. And so a little over a year ago, when I walked away from being an administrator, there was kind of a shift in my personal life and my professional life. And so in my professional life, there had been some changes. We had a new leader that had come into the organization, and I really felt like that was a good time to make a transition. And I had worked with an amazing executive leadership team for years and an amazing group of physicians as well. I had something kind of tugging at me over the last year and a half of my professional career that I wanted to do something on a larger level. And I've been dabbling in consulting a little bit for about 2.5 years on a national level. Maybe 3 or 4 times a year, I would have some different jobs where I was able to move outside of the practice that I was in here in North Carolina. And I loved having that impact on a broader level outside of just the space that I was so comfortable working within. And so a little over a year ago, I decided I took a sabbatical. I wasn't really sure what that was going to look like in timing of when would I become a full-time consultant or really what I was going to do. And I took that time just to decompress after working for years in boardrooms and around tables, making high stakes decisions, leading large teams. It was actually harder to decompress than what I thought it was going to be. It
Oh,
took
okay.
me months to decompress. I did not realize how fast paced my brain was always functioning. And then when I stepped away to take this sabbatical, it almost felt wrong on so many levels to slow down and just kind of appreciate life, notice the things around me, and take time to really figure out what direction did I want to go and how was I going to get there. And so the way my brain works is once I define where I know I want to go, I define, okay, how often, and I work backwards. You know, if this is where I want to be, how am I going to get there and start working at it? And so that's when the idea came around the book. I started getting some clients sooner than I thought I would in
It's
consulting
wonderful.
ophthalmology. Yeah, it's a fairly small world. So I had people that were reaching out, administrators, physicians, and really had some opportunities. And as I began to travel and work with different clients, my creative side really just kind of kicked in of everything came together of why I had landed in this place that I felt I needed to pump the brakes and step back and just kind of reevaluate where I was. And it helped me identify a question that I had struggled with my entire life. I carried with me through every part of my life, and I'd never named it. I'd never identified it. And that question was, am I enough? Why was I not enough for them to stay? And it really comes back to I was adopted at a very, very young age.
Okay.
I carried this question with me. If my biological parents, if I was not enough for them to stay, in the way that my brain worked as a child, and for them to love me, how am I ever going to be enough for a spouse, or to be good enough to be a good mother, or to be good enough to make decisions in a workplace? And so I chased success probably at a more hyper focused than what I would have, because I was trying to answer that question with my life. And so no matter what level of a role that I was in, it was about doing more. I never really stopped to celebrate anything along the way because I wanted to achieve more. And so it always felt like it wasn't enough because I felt like I wasn't enough. And so that's where the idea of some of the content around this book, and then ultimately the title, came to me. Not enough until I was. And so now I'm working in ophthalmology. I'm staying plenty busy, but I'm also doing the work along the way around leading with wholeness and showing up with who I am as I mentor or coach others or step into facilities or organizations, that you can be both. You can be professionally successful and personally fulfilled, and you can love yourself along the way, and you can show up authentically as who you are.
Wonderful. Actually, that was my next question, is that when we hear about your background, now for the people who are sitting at the side, the beautiful bystanders, they say, you know what, it's okay for her to say, I'm not enough until I was, and all these particular things, because she looks like the way she has portrayed herself. She's a successful clinical officer. She has got everything under her belt. She's been successful going around different places. She rubs shoulders with the top people around over here, and she's got everything. So it's easy for her to say, no, I'm not enough. But when you just mentioned about the fact that you were adopted and you carrying that, if I could say the word stigma, all through the life, even though success was something which was, you were under that spotlight, and you worked hard from where you were to where you reached, but still, that, as they call it, as the thorn in the flesh, that wouldn't have left you in peace. So when you look back at life, and maybe I will be stealing few snippets about your book, what has been few pivotal moments in your life that pushed you to the ground,
Mm.
but you said, hey man, yes, you pushed me, but I'm not supposed to be over here. I'll show what my terms of life is.
Wow. Yeah, well, I have plenty to choose from. So, when I was younger, growing up, in my teenage years, in my early years, I was pretty defiant. If you were to speak to my parents, they would very much be, if they're listening to this, they would very much agree in unison that I made a lot of decisions of really testing the boundaries around me, of, if I push you enough, will you stay? And really testing those that loved me, and not really understanding. I didn't even identify what I was doing at the time, but I made a lot of decisions when I was younger with my life, and just probably weren't some of the best decisions. And um, instead of really enjoying high school or enjoying middle school, I had so much insecurity about who I was. Um, I questioned myself, and so I really just pushed all of the limits around me. When it came to school, I was a rule breaker. When it came to home life, I was a rule breaker. And I think as I moving into my adult life, I got married at a young age, really young age. And, it was someone I loved very much. And we had dated through high school. We got married. We were we were fairly early on. I was still in college when we got married. And I came home one day. I've actually never shared this anywhere. I came home one day, and he told me that he was going to leave, that he felt like, we got married too young and he wasn't happy. And I was working a couple of jobs and trying to get through school. And he was a hard worker as well, but he was out on the road a lot. And I didn't know what to do with that. Um, Looking back, I realized that it triggered something for me, because abandonment is a trigger for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was that my parents left when I was little. They weren't able to raise me, and they weren't at a place in life to make good decisions with their own life, to be a parent at that time. And now my husband was leaving me. Now I have answered the question again with my life, am I enough? And it was like, no, I'm not. He's gone. And then I found out a few weeks later I was expecting. So we had a baby on the way, and I went through my pregnancy alone in terms of a relationship. I had family, parents and sisters and brother-in-laws that were supportive, but a broken heart. I had a broken heart, and I was a single mom, and I was grieving the loss of a spouse, and wondering how I was ever going to raise a baby. If I wasn't enough for my spouse to love me, or for my biological parents to love me, would my own baby love me? How was I going to be a mom? And makes me emotional thinking about it today. But the moment I laid eyes on her, I knew I didn't have all the answers as a mom, but I knew I loved her more than anything in the world. And I knew that we would make it somehow in some way. And so it's like, buckle up, buttercup. Here we go, you know? So I graduated college while I was expecting. I'd already started my career in ophthalmology. I continued to work 2 jobs until my oldest, my first child was about 4 years old. And that was hard, working with a broken heart while finding out that you were expecting and then trying to figure out how you were going to make ends meet. I went into early labor with her when I was 27 weeks pregnant, and I had to go to bed. And I had her early. They had to give me steroid injections to develop her heart and lungs while I was expecting, because she only weighed right at a pound, little less than a pound when I first went into labor. And by the time I went into labor and finally had her at 36 weeks, I had stayed at every birthing room on the labor and delivery floor, and they let me pick which room I wanted to deliver in because I had to have so many hospital visits. And I look at her today, she's 24, and
Wow.
she has a BS in nursing, and she works in a hospital, and she just applied for grad school, and she starts in January. And my heart beams with pride. And I didn't do that alone. I did not raise her alone. I went on to get married again. But when we talk about another thing that was really hard to get through, I was very ashamed to say that I'd already been divorced once, which was not my choice. And then I got married again and had a child. She is now 19 years old, soon to be 20. And that marriage started out okay. But after shortly into it, we weren't compatible, and there were anger issues that were involved. I was starting to chase success in my career at that time, but the more successful I came, there were jealousy that came into play. It was hard for him to accept what some of those things were. And so now I had 2 children, 2 marriages, and the writing on the wall of the last 5 to 7 years of the marriage that it just was not going to work. And I was like, here I am again. I am in the middle of failure again. What are people going to think of me? Because I'm now in a marriage that is not going to work with another child. I've already been a single mom. I didn't want to drag my kids through divorce. Neither one of us were in a healthy place. He was not happy. I was not happy. But it had become a lot of mental abuse that I was not willing to live through. And so I made the decision to leave. And it took me a couple of times to do it permanently, because it was hard, and it was really hard on my kids. So my kids were 12 and 16. Here I go. So I just stepped into my highest level role in a practice. I was now chief clinical officer. I was going through a painful divorce with 2 girls at very important ages in life. 12 and 16 is so hard. And now I was trying to figure out how to navigate life with 2 girls that were hurting, myself that was hurting, but I knew what I needed to do. And that's when I really decided, okay, I'm going to start working on what I need for me and for my girls. And if it means I never am in another relationship in life, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I am, I can do this. I didn't know how, and I was scared. And that was probably the hardest thing I ever did, was go through a divorce where my kids were old enough to know what was going on. Divorce is probably one of the most painful things that you can endure in life. If people that are listening that haven't been through divorce would not be able to understand what it's like. For our listeners that have been through divorce, they're probably like, next to losing someone from death, divorce is the most painful thing you can walk through. And you lose some people along the way. You lose people that agreed or sided with either you or who your spouse was, mutual friends that you have They don't know what to do with that. You walk through moments of loneliness. You have family that are supportive, family that aren't supportive, family that don't know what to believe. And you just have to find a way to continue to push forward and pave the way and say, I know in the end, I'm going to be a better version of myself. I know in the end that there's got to be more to life than being this unhealthy and this unhappy. And so those are probably two of the most defining moments, really three, between those marriages and being a single mom with a broken heart. And that pushed me to be okay with who I was and what my next phase in life, which has been the last 8 years of my life.
Wow. So one of the things which I could glean from this entire thing is that the moment you stood and said, rather than why life is happening to me, but why life is happening for me, and what can I learn from it, I think so that's where the transformation took place. Your professional growth has been, from what I hear, has been spectacular. You work for it, and you reach that level. On a personal level, you carried your own baggage of low self-esteem, and of course, saying that you're not enough. I think so. The biggest prize that you got in this entire thing is the moment you stood up for your own self, and you realize what matters was your own self-care, and the people who are closest to you, of course, your daughters. And that's when you started flying way more higher than just professionally. Once you decided, and you mentioned 8 years, it wouldn't have been easy because life doesn't give you anything easy. But what were your thoughts during those times?
Well, I think being adopted had a huge impact on how I viewed myself as a mom. And, you know, I almost grew up with my first daughter. I turned 21 while I was expecting. And at 21, I didn't really know who I was. I mean, not many of us do. We're still figuring out life. And so I just remember thinking throughout various times of their childhood, I never, ever, ever wanted them to feel that they weren't enough or that I wasn't willing to do what was needed to provide safety for them. I wanted them to see that no matter how old you are, even being a female, that you can push through and you can do hard things, and that you can be successful, and that no matter what decisions we've made in life, we can choose to write our future story differently. We can choose to show up differently. I wanted to model. I've been in and out of therapy. My parents exposed me to counseling at a young age when really it was not even socially acceptable in society. You know, in the 80s, people didn't talk as much about going to therapy, but my parents, I had a school counselor all through school, elementary school, middle school, high school, and then at various times throughout my adult life, there were times that I've been in and out of counseling, and I modeled that for them as well, because I wanted them to know that it's okay. It's okay to learn about yourself. It's okay to want to gain coping skills, that you can cope differently, and that it's not weak. It's actually strength. It is strength to say, I want to be a different type of person. I want to be whole. I want to continue to improve. I want to feel hope in my life, because let's be real, whenever things aren't going well, we don't have great coping skills, and either anxiety can kick in, or depression can kick in, or just not being able to focus on things because we're starting to spiral. Those things are painful, and to not want to get to have the ability to have access to those coping skills, I think shows it shows more of a weakness than being willing to go and get them. So I wanted to model that for my girls. Another huge part of this last 8 years was that I met who I am now married to. I said I would never marry again. And God's like, haha, I got jokes, here he
Yes.
comes. And so here comes Mr. Michael Cansler into my life. And I said, I don't think, first of all, I've been through a couple of divorces and was actually going through a divorce when I met him. I said, I have 2 girls. I'm a package. I am a whole package. It's not me or my kids. It's all 3 of us. I got a broken past. I got some things that go along with that. And I don't know that anybody can really handle being a part of that. I don't expect you to carry it, but if you're going to be in my life, it's very much a part of my life. And it's what I'm working through right now. And so you had to be pretty brave to step into a situation of where I was with my girls and we were all hurting in different ways and say, yeah, I'm here for it. And I even tried to push him away a couple of times. We got a few months into it and he was so good. I looked through my trauma lens of life long enough. I just kept waiting for the shoe to drop and for things to get bad or for it to be not enough for him to stay or too much for him to stay. I just kept waiting because the anthem in my life was, if it's good, it's not going to last long. If they know enough about me, they're either A, going to use it against me or they're going to leave. And so to think that he could love me and my girls when we were all hurting so much was like, this isn't going to work. And he dug in. It just heals in. And he was like, I'm here for it. When you need the space, I'll give you the space. When you need me to lean in, I will lean in. There is, it was the first time in life outside of my parents that raised me that I had a healthy relationship that I felt like was safe, that I didn't feel insecure. I didn't worry if he was going to leave. I didn't worry if he was going to lose his temper and say things that he was going to apologize for later, but you still couldn't take it back because the pain was already there. And we've been married 5 years this past summer. We've been together. It was 7 years in March, and he has seen some of the messiest parts of my journey, but the most beautiful parts of my journey, because I've been able to do the work, take my time doing the work and not feel rushed through it and realize that sometimes progress is slow. And there's times that I make big leaps of progress. And then there's times you feel like you're barely crawling, but you just got to keep going, So, it's been an interesting 8 years, but I've had to learn to say, when I look back at the past, where I let my past define me and continue to carry it forward to where it just kind of held me back on the inside, I've had to learn to say, Mandy, you were really doing the best you could with what you had at the time. And that's good enough. It wasn't perfect. You might not have made the best decisions in every single area that society would have viewed that way, or maybe that your family or your friends viewed that way. But it's the best that you could do looking through the lens of trauma that you had at the time. And damn, that's good enough. It's okay. And to learn to give myself grace. I used to not give myself grace. I made fun of my decisions. I let other people make fun of my decisions. Comedy was kind of a coping skill for me. I can be super funny when I want to be, but a lot of it was a coping skill for me. And I still like to have a good time. I don't mind laughing at myself, but I'm not going to laugh at myself because of my weaker moments to cover them up. I'm going to say I am who I am right now because of those moments. And that's good enough for me.
Wonderful. In fact, my next question would have been, what can you say about about the book? But in the last few minutes, you explained what the book was about. And is there one word that you would say about your book?
One word. one word in terms of how
Or you
I,
can say a statement about your book.
a,
What
a
what do you want?
statement. Okay. Um,
Why this book?
so this book is, I'm going to share just a little bit about who I feel like the audience for this book is, and why I want to share this book. First of all, I'm healing through the writing. It's been very empowering to truly own my story and write it down, and then to be able to read it and say it out loud. When I think about, like you said, I've sat at tables with people that have been wildly successful. I've sat with CEOs and, shareholder physicians, and I've been surrounded myself with lots of people that have done some really amazing things that can be pretty intimidating in life if you look at it. But what I also know on the other side of that is we're all people. We all put our pants on the same way. And every single one of us have something that we have carried that has either held us back, that we needed to heal from. So the purpose of this book and is for other people that have either been overachievers, they have been people pleasers, they've struggled with the question of why, am I enough, or never feeling like they're enough. Um, People that have been adoptive parents, to understand from an adoptee's point of view what can carry with them throughout life, because it doesn't just stop when they're a child and they go into a home. And so this book is, I hope, a beacon of light. Towards the last half of my book, it's leaning in to be who I am and take it into my professional life as well, not just personally, because you can't really barricade and say, this is who I am personally, this is who I am professionally. If you're going to be the best version of yourself, you're going to take that with you everywhere you go. And you're going to step into who you are with being authentically yourself, and knowing that you could still do great professional things instead of masking and showing up. And so my hope for this book is, and what I'm learning as I'm writing it, is that everything that has happened to us in life leads us to where we are right now. And we don't have to have a ton of regrets. We can own what that is and decide what good do we want to come out of it. Even if it was painful moments in our life or trauma, that doesn't have to define who you are. That's not your identity. You can choose what you want to do with that. And so I want this to be a book of hope, that at any point in time in your life, you can draw a line in the sand and you can say, I am who I am because of this, and this is where I'm going to go. And have that resilience to know that you can get there, and to learn to love yourself through the process.
Fantastic, fantastic. So guys, over here, I'll be putting on Mandy's contact information down in the comments below. And know about the book, get ready to pre-order it and have it on your shelves, because she's a walking, talking example of what perseverance is all about. Coming from the depths of her own insecurities, her own low self-esteem, and still rising above. And here what we have seen is a person who has walked the talk. And Mandy, thank you so very much for your space
Thank you
and
so
time.
much.
It has been a wonderful conversation.
This has been great. Thank you so much for having me.